You ever think you truly know someone? Their habits, their routines, their heart. Savannah's summer heat was nothing compared to what Kiera Rowe felt in her chest that night, a pressure, a burn, a sharp truth she never saw coming. She was 6 months pregnant, exhausted, and trusting. Her husband, Lester, said he had a work job out of town. She believed him. Why wouldn't she? He was the man who rubbed her swollen feet at night. The man who coached their daughter's soccer team. The man who made grilled cheese and tomato soup when morning sickness hit too hard. Until her sister sent a photo. One snapshot. One parked truck. One address that didn't match the story. By nightfall, Kiera found herself parked outside a local hotel. Not in a confrontation, not in a public scene, just watching. Watching the flicker of lights behind a curtain. Waiting for proof she didn't want. Praying she was wrong. What she saw broke something inside her that would never fully mend. A man she thought she knew. A life she thought she built. A future she thought she was safe in. Gone. In seconds. Have you ever learned the truth about someone too late? Have you ever felt your world shift under your feet in silence? That moment didn't just end a marriage. It set off a chain of events that left one woman dead, another woman in labor weeks too soon, and an entire community asking the same question: who was Lester Rowe, really? This is the story of a man who wore a mask so well, even he started to believe it. A husband. A father. A businessman. And ultimately, a killer. Before you judge what he did, you need to know how it started. Because sometimes, it's not the crime that shocks you most, it's how easily the mask falls off. From the outside, the Rowes looked like the kind of couple you trust to host your Sunday barbecue or lead a church fundraiser. Lester was 36, solid build, always smiling, always shaking hands. He ran a local landscaping company that had grown fast in just a few years. His trucks were everywhere. His face, even more so. Community events, small business mixers, PDA fundraisers, Lester made sure people saw him. Kiera, his wife of 7 years, worked as a part-time administrator at a local charter school. Quiet, polished, kind. The sort of woman who mailed out handwritten thank you cards for baby shower gifts and still brought brownies to neighbors, even when she was heavily pregnant. If you're captivated by stories like this and want more gripping true crime narratives, don't forget to subscribe, like, and drop a comment below. Your support helps keep these powerful stories alive, and ensures they're never forgotten. They had a 5-year-old daughter, Alani, who looked like a miniature version of Kiera, wide eyes, steady smile, full of questions. And in 6 more weeks, their son was due. But anyone who's lived long enough knows, public perfection can be the loudest disguise. Lester wasn't raised in a calm household. His mother worked 2 jobs, and his father disappeared before he hit middle school. He learned early how to read a room, how to charm, how to distract. He was good at making people feel seen, because deep down, he'd never felt that himself. By the time he reached adulthood, he had mastered the art of compartmentalizing, pain in one drawer, ambition in another, and lies wherever they'd fit. He met Kiera at a mutual friend's wedding. She was 24, just out of college, trying to figure out if she wanted to pursue her master's in education. He was 10 years older, confident, grounded, already building something. Their connection was quick and magnetic. He said all the right things. Kiera was drawn to his certainty. He made her feel like there was finally something secure in her life. They married within a year. But over time, cracks began to form. Nothing dramatic. No slammed doors or bruises or screaming matches. Just slow, silent shifts. Missed dinners. Work calls that dragged on into the night. Excuses wrapped in affection. Kiera chalked it up to business stress. Lester had expanded his team, taken on more contracts, and was hardly ever home. But when he was home, he was loving. Attentive. The kind of father who played with Alani in the yard until the sun dipped below the trees. Kiera convinced herself this was just a season. Marriage, after all, had rhythms. But Lester's rhythm had started to beat to someone else's name. Mallory Gaines. She was 27. Newly divorced. Trying to rebuild a life after a bad marriage. She worked part-time at the front desk of a physical therapy clinic, just enough to pay rent and keep her pride intact. That's where she met Lester. He came in for a minor knee issue. She flirted, casually. He responded, easily. At first, it was just smiles. Then it was jokes. Then it was numbers exchanged with a wink and a promise to grab coffee sometime. It escalated fast. Mallory said she didn't know he was married at first. And maybe she didn't. But by the time she found out, she was already attached. Lester, as always, had a smooth explanation, "We're basically separated. She's just staying until the baby's born." It's complicated. Mallory wanted to believe him. Lester didn't just bring flowers, he brought groceries. He fixed the faucet in her bathroom. Paid a chunk of her overdue rent without being asked. He told her he was tired of pretending to be happy at home. Said he was looking at apartments they could share. Mallory started planning for a future that didn't exist. Back in Kiera's world, things were getting harder. Her pregnancy hadn't been easy. She'd been experiencing dizzy spells and high blood pressure, and her OB/GYN had warned her to rest more, stress less. Lester responded with empathy, on the surface. He started working overnight jobs more often, saying he needed to be out of town to oversee crews. Kiera didn't press. She felt guilty for needing help, for not being stronger. She trusted him to be where he said he was. She didn't know she was sharing him. And she never thought her own sister would be the one to show her. Danica had always been skeptical of Lester. She didn't dislike him, just didn't buy into the local hero image. So when she saw his landscaping truck parked outside a downtown hotel, her instincts lit up. That night, she sent a photo to Kiera with a single message, "Isn't he supposed to be out of town?" That was the moment everything started to shift. Kiera stared at the image for nearly 10 minutes, her hands trembling, her breath uneven. She hadn't expected this. Not now. Not while she was 6 months along. But denial can only hold up so long. She didn't call him. She didn't cry. She asked to borrow Danica's car. She drove to the hotel slowly, every mile adding weight to her chest. Every red light was a silent prayer. Let this be a mistake. Let that truck be someone else's. Let me be wrong. But she wasn't. She parked 2 rows over. Waited. Room 214 had its curtain cracked just enough to see a shadow, 2 shadows, actually. She watched them laugh. Saw a shirtless Lester lean into someone who wasn't her. Something inside her cracked open. She walked up to the door, knocked once, twice, then began pounding with a force she didn't know she had. Lester answered, eyes wide, guilt written all over his face. She tried to push past him. He blocked the door. But the moment had already betrayed him. Kiera saw everything she needed to see. Mallory, half-dressed, frozen. Lester, mumbling apologies. Kiera, standing in the middle of it all, clutching her belly like it was the only thing keeping her upright. She collapsed. Not from drama. From devastation. Lester carried her to the car. Said it was a mistake. Said he was weak. Said all the things men say when their truth comes crashing through the ceiling. Kiera didn't answer. She went to her sister's house that night. Sent a single message, "We're done." For a few hours, there was silence. No one knew what Lester would do next. Not even Lester. The call came in at 6:42 a.m. A frantic voice on the other end of the line. Male. Barely coherent. There's blood. She's not breathing. Oh my God, please, just send someone. Please. The 911 dispatcher did what they always do, kept him on the line, tried to extract clarity from chaos. The caller identified himself as Lester Rowe, gave the address, 1092, Briarfield Lane. His voice was ragged. His breathing was heavy. He kept repeating one sentence like a scratched record, she's pregnant. She's pregnant. She's pregnant. When first responders arrived 7 minutes later, they found Lester sitting on the front steps in socks, his white t-shirt soaked in blood, hands trembling in his lap. His eyes were glassy. Shocked. Or pretending to be. Inside, the scene was carnage. Kiera lay on the bedroom floor, her head turned unnaturally to the side. Her face was swollen, marked by fresh bruises. Blood pooled beneath her temple, staining the beige carpet a deep rust red. The dresser drawer had been pulled out and toppled. One of the lamps was shattered. A framed wedding photo lay face down near her feet. The paramedics did their best, but there was no saving her. She was pronounced dead at 6:59 a.m. The baby, 32 weeks along, was still. No heartbeat. Double tragedy. By 7:20, the house was swarming with uniformed officers, evidence technicians, and crime scene analysts. The Rose quiet cul-de-sac buzzed with tension. Neighbors emerged in robes and slippers, whispering to each other, eyes wide, trying to piece together what no one could comprehend. Lester was taken to the station for routine questioning. Not arrested. Not yet. Detective Elise Navarro led the investigation. A 15-year veteran of the Homicide Division, she had a calm but cutting demeanor. No wasted words. No room for theatrics. When she entered the interview room, Lester sat hunched over, silent, still wearing the blood-stained shirt. She didn't start with accusations. She started with a whisper. "Tell me what happened, Lester." He said he had gone out for a jog at 5:30 a.m. When he returned, he found the back door slightly open and immediately felt something was wrong. He called out for Kiera, no answer. Walked through the house, heart pounding. When he reached the bedroom, he found her on the floor. I checked her pulse, he said. I tried CPR. I didn't know what to do. Navarro asked if anything was missing. Forced entry. Signs of a break-in? No, he admitted. But someone must have come in when I was gone. It doesn't make sense. But it didn't make sense, and Navarro knew it. Here's what started not adding up. Lester said he left for a jog around 5:30 a.m. But a neighbor's Ring doorbell camera recorded no movement from the front door or driveway during that time. The back gate, which he claimed might have been used by the intruder, was closed and latched from the inside. There was no sign of forced entry. No fingerprints on the back door handle that didn't belong to Lester or Kiera. Kiera's injuries weren't consistent with a random home invasion. There were no defensive wounds on her arms or hands. No signs of struggle with a stranger. But most telling of all, the baby. A forensic OB/GYN expert later stated that based on the condition of the fetus, trauma likely occurred hours before the 911 call. Which meant Kiera had died long before Lester ever called it in. The autopsy confirmed the worst. Kiera had been struck 3 times in the head with a blunt object, likely a lamp base or heavy bookend. Her left eye socket was fractured. She had minor bruising on her forearms, indicating a struggle, but nothing defensive. It appeared the attack had come quickly and from close range, possibly while she was sitting or lying down. And then came the kicker, she also had a ruptured spleen. Medical examiners determined she had suffered a blow to the abdomen hard enough to compromise her internal organs. For a pregnant woman in her 3rd trimester, that was catastrophic. It caused internal bleeding, and likely induced cardiac arrest. The baby stood no chance. The official cause of death, blunt force trauma to the head and abdomen. When word hit the news that a pregnant mother had been murdered in her own home, the community spiraled. The rows were supposed to be picture perfect. Lester, the neighborhood entrepreneur. Kiera, the selfless school administrator. The media pounced. Headlines exploded: pregnant teacher murdered in suburban home, husband discovers body, double tragedy in Briarfield Lane, who killed Kiera Rowe? Was this a random break-in, or something worse? Local news vans parked outside the Rowe house for 3 days straight. Online forums speculated non-stop. And behind the scenes, Detective Navarro quietly built her case. Lester stayed cooperative. Until he wasn't. On day 4, Navarro asked for his cell phone. He hesitated. When she obtained a warrant, everything spilled. Texts. Dozens of them. To and from Mallory Gaines. Love notes. Sexual messages. Plans. Lies. Confessions. And most damning, an unsent draft saved in his notes app dated just 1 week before the murder. I can't do this much longer. She's not letting go. I'm not happy. I'm not built for this kind of trap. When Navarro confronted him, his demeanor changed. He didn't deny the affair. Couldn't. But he insisted he never would have hurt Kiera. I told her we were done. I told her I was moving out, he said. That's when Navarro said, she was leaving you. We found her packed bags in the hall closet. Did you know that? Silence. Did you know she spoke to a divorce attorney 2 days ago? Still silent. The final blow came from a voice Lester thought would never betray him. Mallory Gaines. She'd come forward voluntarily after seeing the news. She was shaking when she walked into the precinct, clutching a copy of a text message Lester had sent the night before Kiera died. Tomorrow everything changes. She thought it meant he was finally filing for divorce. Now she wasn't so sure. She told detectives Lester had gotten angry when Kiera changed the locks 2 weeks prior. That he hated the idea of child support. That he felt trapped by another baby. And, she admitted something else. Lester had asked her once, casually, if she ever thought about what it'd be like if she wasn't around anymore. She'd laughed. Brushed it off. But now, it didn't feel so funny. By day 6, the evidence was undeniable. Lester was arrested and charged with 2 counts of murder, 1 for Kiera, and 1 for the unborn child. As officers led him from the station in handcuffs, news cameras captured every step. His face was blank. Cold. As if the man who once kissed his wife's pregnant belly had never existed at all. And in the crowd, just beyond the yellow tape, stood Danica, Kiera's sister. Tears streaming down her face. Jaw clenched. She whispered one word under her breath, over and over, like a mantra, liar. By the time Lester Rowe was officially charged with the murders of his pregnant wife and their unborn child, the quiet town of Briarfield had already passed its own sentence. The rain fell relentlessly that morning. Gentle, steady, as though the sky itself grieved alongside a shattered family. 3 days had passed since his arrest. The courtroom was filled to capacity for his arraignment. On one side sat Kiera's devastated family, her mother gripping a photo of her daughter so tightly the corners had curled in. Danica, haunted and composed, sat still as stone beside her. On the opposite side, reporters scribbled notes and former colleagues whispered in conflicted tones, unable to reconcile the Lester they had known with the man now in shackles. Lester looked diminished in the county-issued jumpsuit, his once confident frame slightly hunched, eyes vacant, like a man watching his life dissolve in slow motion. As the charges were read, 2 counts of first-degree murder, tampering with evidence, obstruction of justice, there was no flicker of emotion. No protest. Just silence. The judge denied bail. The prosecution insisted that Lester's calculated efforts to conceal the crime, his attempts to manipulate those around him, and the nature of the killings themselves all pointed to premeditated malice. He was not only dangerous, he was methodical. Though the defense pushed back, it was clear even then, this would not be a battle for freedom. It would be a battle for how history would remember him. Lester's legal team brought in Philip Cross, a seasoned defense attorney with a reputation for making smoke look like fog. Cross was sharp, elegant, and precise, a man who knew how to stir doubt without ever needing to name an alternative suspect. His strategy began with an old trick: dismantle the state's narrative not by disproving it, but by poking holes until it collapsed under its own weight. But the prosecution, led by State Attorney Mara Jensen, was formidable. She didn't flinch at complexity, nor did she care for theatrics. To her, this was a classic case of intimate partner homicide, a slow-burning powder keg of emotional control, infidelity, and crumbling ego. And when Kiera tried to reclaim her life, Lester decided she wouldn't live to do so. If you're captivated by stories like this and want more gripping true crime narratives, don't forget to subscribe, like, and drop a comment below. Your support helps keep these powerful stories alive and ensures they're never forgotten. The 6 months leading up to trial were tense and bitter. The media transformed the case into daily spectacle. Daytime TV shows debated the nature of Lester's personality, analyzing body language and dissecting text messages. Podcasts ran serialized deep dives into the affair, the marriage, the final days of Kiera's life. Social media users combed through digital breadcrumbs, searching for any hint of the truth. Public sentiment was nearly unanimous. Lester had been the perfect husband on paper, the polished professional, the doting soon-to-be father. But behind closed doors, he had been unraveling. And still, the evidence, though extensive, was largely circumstantial. There were no eyewitnesses to the murder. No murder weapon had been recovered. Forensics had failed to link Lester's DNA directly to the act of violence. It was, by legal standards, a case that would rise or fall on the strength of the story it told. The prosecution's story was ruthless and tightly woven. It followed the thread from marital resentment to infidelity, from financial anxiety to psychological deterioration. It emphasized the timeline of events, the fabricated jog, the delayed 911 call, the emotional manipulation of Mallory, and the attempts to stage a break-in that never truly fooled anyone. Experts were lined up to explain the pathology of control, how men like Lester didn't snap, but planned. They showed how the crime wasn't a moment of passion, it was a final act of possession. The defense, in contrast, danced in shadows. They highlighted the absence of blood evidence on Lester's person, questioned the integrity of the crime scene, and quietly suggested that others, namely Mallory Gaines or even Danica, could have had motive. These insinuations were subtle, never fully formed, but designed to chip away at certainty. If the case could be rendered cloudy enough, doubt might become salvation. The trial opened in late October under a gray sky. The courthouse became a shrine to grief and scandal. Crowds formed daily, some seeking justice, others seeking spectacle. The jury, carefully selected and sequestered, bore the burden of discerning the truth within a narrative that was both devastating and meticulously engineered. Witness after witness took the stand. Danica recounted the night before the murder. The fearful phone call from Kiera, the tone of finality in her voice. She spoke of a sister who had begun to fear the man she once loved, and who had made clear plans to leave him for good. Her testimony painted Lester not as a grieving husband, but as a man desperate to maintain the illusion of control. Then came Mallory Gaines, Lester's mistress. Visibly shaken, she confessed to the affair, the lies, and the regret that had consumed her since Kiera's death. She detailed Lester's emotional manipulation, his cryptic messages, and the unshakable dread she felt when Kiera's body was found. Her voice trembled as she recounted the moment she realized the man she had loved might be a killer. Forensics experts mapped out the physical evidence, or lack thereof. The autopsy confirmed the brutality of the attack. The child had not been viable outside the womb, but its death had occurred moments after Kiera's. The weapon had likely been blunt, perhaps a household object, though none had ever been found. The absence of a clear murder weapon became a minor victory for the defense, but the rest of the story outweighed it. The prosecution reconstructed Lester's digital trail, erased search histories, factory resets, a disappearing laptop backup. One investigator described the level of planning as surgical. Not the act of a man who panicked, but of one who prepared. And then, Lester made the fateful decision to testify in his own defense. He took the stand against counsel's advice, perhaps believing his charm could still persuade. But the mask had long since cracked. His testimony was controlled, emotionless. He admitted to the affair, acknowledged the marital strain, and spoke of grief in ways that felt scripted and distant. The jury watched, unmoved. Every word seemed to push them further away from belief. The cross-examination was unrelenting. His timeline didn't hold. His reactions didn't make sense. And his lack of remorse, the hollowness behind his eyes, became its own kind of confession. The trial lasted 16 days. When the jury retired to deliberate, no one dared to predict how long it would take. But just 6 hours later, they returned. The verdict was unanimous. Lester Rowe was found guilty on all counts. First-degree murder of Kiera Rowe, first-degree murder of their unborn child, obstruction of justice, and tampering with evidence. The courtroom erupted in quiet sobs. Danica collapsed into her mother's arms. Reporters scribbled furiously. And Lester simply sat, still and vacant, as though the reality had not yet reached him. At sentencing, the judge imposed the harshest penalties allowed by law. Life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, plus 20 years for the death of the unborn child. There would be no redemption. No second chance. Just the cold, gray eternity of consequence. Outside the courthouse, Kiera's name was spoken not with tears, but with defiance. Her story had become something larger than tragedy. It had become a warning. A rallying cry for women in quiet, dangerous relationships. A permanent reminder of how control, when masked as love, can become a fatal weapon. The case of Lester Rowe was over. But the legacy of Kiera's life, and the horror of her death, was only beginning to shape the world she left behind. The trial of Lester Rowe began on a cold Monday morning in late October. A brittle wind swept through the city, rattling the courthouse windows like a forewarning of the storm that was about to unfold inside. Long before the judge took the bench, a line of spectators had already gathered outside, clutching coffees and rumors, anxious to secure a seat for what had been dubbed the most chilling trial Briarfield had seen in 2 decades. Inside, tension hung thick in the air, heavy and unspoken. The jury was a diverse group of 12, 8 women, 4 men, spanning generations and professions. They were instructed to put aside everything they had read, seen, or heard in the months leading up to this moment. But how does one silence the roar of headlines? How does one forget a woman found lifeless in her own home, her unborn child silenced before its first breath? The prosecution opened with a photograph, one that hadn't been made public before. It was of Kiera, smiling softly, her hand resting gently on her baby bump. The image needed no words. In one frame, it told the jury what had been stolen, a mother, a future, a heartbeat that never had the chance to become a name. From that moment on, the trial became more than a legal proceeding. It became a moral reckoning. Prosecutor Mara Jensen stood calmly, her voice steady but fierce. She told the jury what they already feared was true, that Lester Rowe had planned the murder of his wife and unborn child. Not in a fit of rage, but in cold, methodical steps. Because he was losing control of his marriage, his image, and his carefully constructed life. Because Kiera had dared to walk away. Because she had learned to say no. Over the next several days, the prosecution laid out a damning sequence of events. Every thread was tied to another. Every lie led to a deeper truth. The jury heard from a digital forensic expert who pulled fragments of Lester's deleted messages, fragments that revealed far more than silence ever could. Texts to Mallory Gaines, crafted carefully, hinted at the exhaustion of his double life, his desire for freedom, his frustration with Kiera's emotional manipulation. They weren't outright admissions. They didn't need to be. They painted a picture of a man who saw his wife as an obstacle, not a partner. A burden, not a blessing. Then came the home security technician, who testified that the family's indoor camera system had mysteriously stopped uploading to the cloud the night before the murder. The hard drive had been wiped. The backup, conveniently corrupted. A technical malfunction, Lester had told police. But when stacked against everything else, it began to look more like digital erasure, like the deliberate deletion of something that could never be unseen. But the most shattering moment came when Danica took the stand. She entered the courtroom slowly, her spine straight but her eyes darkened by months of sleepless nights. As she spoke, the room fell silent, not from legal decorum, but from the gravity of her testimony. She described the phone call she received from Kiera the night before she was killed. How her sister had finally decided to leave Lester. How she had packed a bag for herself and a hospital one for the baby. How she was planning to stay with Danica for a while. How she had said, "If anything happens to me, don't let him raise my child alone." Those words hit the courtroom like a wrecking ball. The defense tried to object. They tried to cast doubt. But doubt, when it's overwhelmed by truth, becomes irrelevant. And yet, defense attorney Philip Cross fought back with everything he had. He was a master at crafting uncertainty. He pointed out the lack of direct physical evidence tying Lester to the scene. No DNA. No fingerprints on a murder weapon. No eyewitness. He reminded the jury that passion could cloud perception, that grief could distort memory. He questioned the timeline, scrutinized the investigation, and planted just enough seeds to make a lesser jury hesitate. But this jury wasn't lesser. They had also heard from the medical examiner, who confirmed the fatal blows to Kiera's skull and the internal injuries that led to the death of the fetus. The sheer force required, delivered at close range, made it virtually impossible for the act to have been committed by a stranger. This was intimate violence. This was personal. They had listened to Mallory Gaines, now visibly gaunt and aged by guilt, as she recounted the morning after the murder. How Lester had texted her not with panic, but with a strange calmness. How he had said he needed space, not needed help. She wept on the stand, saying, "I knew in my bones something was wrong. But I didn't want to believe it." And perhaps the most haunting evidence of all, a lullaby recording on Kiera's phone, found buried in a voice memo file, one she had sung to her unborn son the night before. It played softly in the courtroom, just once. Every juror bowed their heads. Even the judge paused to wipe his eyes. That recording, the prosecutor would later say in closing arguments, was the voice of a woman who still had hope. Who still believed she and her baby had a future. And Lester had taken that away. When the closing arguments ended, the courtroom emptied of words. There was nothing left to say. The jury deliberated for just under 7 hours. When they returned, not a single face gave away the verdict. The judge read the papers slowly. The courtroom held its collective breath. On the count of first-degree murder of Kiera Rowe, guilty. On the count of first-degree murder of the unborn child, guilty. On the counts of obstruction and tampering, guilty. Gasps filled the room. A sob broke from Kiera's mother's throat. Danica bowed her head and pressed her hands together, not in victory, but in sorrowful release. Lester didn't flinch. Not once. He stood perfectly still, the same posture he had maintained since day one. But something had changed in his eyes. It wasn't surprise. It was the slow, soul-crushing realization that no performance, no calculated silence, no legal strategy could unmake what he had done. The sentence came swiftly. Life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. An additional 20 years for the death of the unborn child. 5 more for obstruction and tampering. Lester Rowe would die behind bars. As he was led from the courtroom, he passed Danica in the gallery. She didn't speak. She didn't blink. She simply stared at him with a calm that only those who survive monsters can wear. Outside, reporters swarmed. Microphones pointed. Cameras flashed. But inside that courthouse, the silence returned. And in that silence, something sacred had been restored, not justice in its purest form, perhaps, but at least, a reckoning. Kiera's story had been heard. Her voice, once buried under bruises and betrayal, had risen. And in that courtroom, where truth fought a bitter war against manipulation, her voice had finally won. If you're captivated by stories like this and want more gripping true crime narratives, don't forget to subscribe, like, and drop a comment below. Your support helps keep these powerful stories alive, and ensures they're never forgotten.